Rosh Hashanna kol bo'ei olam ovrim lefonov ki Benei Maron. The words of the Mishna and Rosh Hashanah Daf Tes Zayin, which is really, interestingly, the earliest source that we've got for the central idea of Rosh Hashanah, that the day is a Yom Hadin. In the Chumash, in the Tanakh itself, nowhere is mentioned that Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Hadin, but it's part of Torah Shebaal Peh, Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, that we have a Maseira, that in actual fact the significance of Rosh Hashanah lies in the fact that we are being judged by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that this is the moment where we are accountable to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for our lives. And this idea appears for the first time in this Mishnah, but Rosh Hashanah, and I want to pay attention really to the words, particularly two words that appear here in this Mishnah, which are Omer Dorsheni. We have to understand, why would the author of the Mishnah use very strange language to express this idea? If I was the author of the Mishnah and I wanted to express the idea that everybody passes before HaKadosh Baruch Hu in judgment, I would say, Kol boy olam ovrim lefonov b'mishpat, or omdim lefonov badin, all these phrases we find in our davening. And yet the Mishnah uses this phrase, ovrim lefonov ki Benei Maron, mem reish vav nun. What could possibly be the meaning of Benei Maron? And you always find when Chazal use an unusual phrase that they've chosen it carefully in order for it to have lots of different layers of meaning. And today we're going to look at two very particular, very interesting ways of reading this Mishnah. But before I do so, I just want to mention that the Rambam, when he's got his Perush on this Mishnah, he says something a bit uncharacteristic, but something very important for this Dvar Torah that I want to share with you. And that is, the Rambam says, what is Benei Maron? So he says the Pasha Pshat is sheep. Like a flock of sheep, we pass before HaKadosh Baruch Hu like a flock of sheep. That is the simple translation of the word, says the Rambam. But he says, Aval yesh bezeh soid. There's a secret, hidden meaning here. There's something here which is nista. It's not nigle. And this is unusual for the Rambam. This is the language usually used by the more mystical, Kabbalistic type Meforshim, like the Orach Chaim or the Ramban. But there's a side here. He's just giving us a little signal here, the Rambam, that to pause on these words, Benei Maron, what could they possibly mean? So I want to first start with the Maharal of Prague, writing 500 years ago. He says Benei Maron is chosen because actually there are three meanings to the word Benei Maron. The Gemara itself asks the question, my Benei Maron, and gives three meanings. And these three meanings are actually the three different dimensions of mishpat, of judgment, that human beings are subjected to on Rosh Hashanah. And I say human beings because we first have to be medayik in the Mishnah, that it says kol boy olam. It's not just Klal Yisrael who are being judged. It's mankind is being judged. That all the nations of the world are being judged on Rosh Hashanah. I'll call upon him. What are these three different meanings of the word Benei Maron? Says the Gemara there in Rosh Hashanah explains possibly three things. The first explanation is, as we said before, Tirgamah, says the Gemara, Benei Maron means a flock of sheep. That's one pshat. The second pshat is Ma'alois Benei Maron, that apparently there was like a mountain pass up in the Galil somewhere. It was so narrow that one could only pass one person at a time. And the third pshat was, Benei Maron was a reference to Chayalei David, the royal guards of the soldiers protecting David HaMelech and the palace and the Malchus. Says the Maharal of Prague something very profound. When a person is being judged, he's being judged on three different levels. First of all, like sheep, what does it mean like sheep? That the farmer judges his sheep on a standard set of criteria. Do they have this amount of wool, this amount of meat, this amount of healthy, one thing and another? Everybody is judged on a standard set of criteria, and that is the halacha. In other words, are you keeping Shabbos? Are you keeping Hilchos Lashon Hara? Are you keeping Hilchos Pesach and Yom Kippur? In other words, the standard halacha which is applicable to every man and woman in Klal Yisrael. That's the first judgment. How well are you doing in that sphere? The second chapter, the second judgment is not that at all. The second judgment is the narrow path where people pass one at a time, says the Maral, refers to the uniqueness of each individual. Every person was brought into this world with a unique combination of talents, abilities, assets, strengths, skills, contacts. Everybody has a unique configuration of abilities, and therefore everyone has a unique shlichus, a unique role to play in the bigger picture of mankind and of Klal Yisrael. And the second question is not, are you keeping Shabbos, but are you realizing your potential? Are you realizing the unique gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given you, and you alone, are you using them properly? That's the second judgment. And the third judgment is Chayalei Melech David. Means, says the Maharal, you might be keeping the Shulchan Aruch and you might be realizing your potential, but there's a third dimension here, and that is, to what extent are you doing your utmost for Klal Yisrael? What are you doing for Am Yisrael? What are you doing for the people of Israel? What are you doing for the community? How are you somehow improving mankind? This is a third mishpat, he says. We find a similar idea, for example, in the Mesilas Yesharim, chapter 19, when he speaks about Midas Chasidus. So he speaks about Chasidus as being at a high level of Avodas Hashem and Medaktek B'mitzvahs and Kavanah and Tefillah, etc., etc., etc. And then he says, but of course, in addition to all this, a person has to be dedicated L'tovat HaKlal. A person has to be dedicated in some way to doing something for the Klal, not to be egocentric, not to be somebody who is simply doing what is best for him or her, but to somehow take on a shlichus for Klal Yisrael. And these are the three judgments. And that is why, and if you think about this for a minute, the brilliance, the Ruach HaKodesh, if you like, of the author of the Mishnah, to choose a phrase which has got three meanings to it, because there are three types of judgment that every person is subjected to, and on those judgments, we are being examined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu on the Yom HaDin. Anybody who thinks through these judgments gets an extra feeling in the pasuk Mi Ya'amoid Lefonecho Badin. How it's not possible for anybody, right, for a person to really feel confident and comfortable under the magnifying glass of the Bezdin Shel Mala on all these three. Everybody has to feel that they need the slicha and mechila of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for having fallen short of what is required of us, and that's part of tshuva. And tshuva then is the way in which we can, in some way, improve ourselves on all three levels. What's interesting here is that in the Ben Yehoyada, the Sefer Ben Yehoyada, written by the Ben Ish Chai in Baghdad 150 years ago, is the same three Perushim, which is in the Gemara, but he takes them completely in a different direction. And I find this very fascinating. He says that actually these three Perushim refer to three different levels of limud zechus. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he judges us in a way which is din berachamim, as the Ramban says in Parshas Emor, that Rosh Hashanah is din berachamim, right? That the teruah, which is the din, is enveloped on both sides by the tekiah, which is the rachamim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he says there are three different limud zechus for Klal Yisrael. The Sanega, the Council for the Defense, is able to say three things. First of all, like sheep, when they damage a field or damage a garden, they do it just because they've got bad habits, because they're following the crowd. They're not doing it maliciously. They're not doing it thinkingly. They're just living on autopilot. And lots of our averos and shortcomings are done that way, and that's the first limud zechus. The second limud zechus is when you walk on a narrow path, which is on the side of a mountain, kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar ma'od, ze mafchit. It's frightening. And because of the anxiety and the pressures of life, sometimes people make mistakes and commit averos, and that's the second level of defense. And the third level of defense is that the soldiers of David HaMelech were chosen because they were mishpachas miyuchosas. They all had zechus avos, zechus imohos, zeiche chaste avos. And so the third level of defense is, even if we are undeserving of a mishpat l'toiv, we have Zechus Avos from our earlier generations, and in that way we can be Zeicha Badin, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us all a Shanas Bracha, B'atzlacha, Geula, V'Yeshua, V'chein Yirotza.